So thank you everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Fred Darvon. I'm one of the co-founders, co-organizers of this group, along with Phil Hodgin of RDG Planning and Design. We are a group of community leaders who meet once a month on the third Wednesday, and our primary purpose is creative problem solving around organizational learning, systems thinking and design thinking, and creative problem solving for our communities, our organizations, and also improving our leadership. And if you have joined us, we keep you on the, you've shown an interest by joining us, so we keep you on the invite list until you tell us otherwise. So the invite comes out around the first of the month. And so looking ahead to next month, we have Umar Shiraz. He's a policy advisor and at ComSat University in Islamabad, Pakistan. He will be speaking to us next month in our meeting on assumptions and futures, how our assumptions and the futures, how we create futures from our assumptions, and I will let him delve more into that. It'll be a great topic. And by the way, Leslie presented on leaders as futurists in September, and so there was a real appetite for that learning. So we're glad to be able to continue that with Umar. We'd like you to join us on Facebook, DSM Discovery Group. So we can continue the conversation, and we post topics that are related to our group and the purposes of our group. So we hope that you will join us. So today we are very glad to have Trace Pickering. He is the executive founder and executive director of Iowa Big, a transforming educational program focused on unleashed potential. His topic today is human-centered learning, a model for the future of education. And he is the educational program is a joint effort with Cedar Rapids, Linn-Mar, Albernet, and College Community School Districts here in Iowa. So Trace, thank you for joining us, and you are on share screen, and we are looking forward to to hearing about your work.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks, everyone. It's good to be with you this morning. So I'm just going to make a few comments this morning, kind of talk to you about why Iowa Big exists and what we're up to, and then really look forward to conversation. I know there's several people on here who have unique perspectives. Leslie Wright had a son go through Iowa Big, so she can talk to it from a parent's perspective. Alan Moreau's been my longtime mentor, and he's seen Iowa Big evolve. And Autumn Pino and I have worked together in the past, and she has a middle school that looks a lot like what Iowa Big does for high school kids. So, and then Maureen, my new friend out in the West Coast, is doing something similar too. So excited to see so many people here who have insights and things to share. And Eddie, yes, your name was familiar. I do remember the VREP work, and that was a long time ago. So let me share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up. Can you see the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. So today I want to really talk about human-centered learning and a model for the future of education, and why I think this is so critical, especially at the point in time we're at now. So really the thesis or today's argument is that the future of educational reform is past. It's past time. It's definitely time now for a human-centered, learner-centered approach, and that requires a transformation. And reformation and transformation are fundamentally different things, and we can talk more about that later. But transformation is a much more difficult thing, obviously, than reform. Reform is taking what you already have and continuing to try to improve it and tweak it and continuously improve it. Transformation is fundamentally starting with a blank sheet of paper and challenging all the assumptions you have about how kids learn and how school should work and what's important to learn. All of those things need to be challenged and brought to light and say, is this an accurate assumption in today's world or is it not? And if it's not, we have an obligation to make something different happen for our kids. So how did we get Big started? In 2008 in Cedar Rapids, we had at the time, the fourth worst natural disaster in US history. 10 square miles of our downtown was inundated with the Cedar River, which runs right down the middle of our downtown. In some cases, the floodwaters reached the second story of homes. Just to give you a perspective, the river normally flows at about 12 feet and it was at 31 feet. And so it literally wiped out our downtown and much of our community. And at the time, we had some very forward-thinking community leaders who came in and said, we can't just out streets off and put businesses back together. We were somewhat of a struggling community in 2008, trying to figure out what the next 100 years needed to look like for us. We're an old industrial agricultural community. We thrived in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And again, just like lots of communities, Des Moines, Dubuque, other places who've gone through the same kind of thing, had to redefine themselves. And so that work began. We saw entrepreneurs begin to take root in our community, and arts and culture made a huge rebound, and lots of excitement about new things happening, new businesses starting. And one of the community leaders, a guy named Chuck Peters, said, that nobody's talking about education during this very same time. We have an education system that was designed for a time that doesn't exist anymore. So why aren't we talking about education? And so he asked me to be a community builder. He was the CEO of our local media company. And he said, can you help change the conversation in our community about education? Our community had some very outstanding traditional high schools, always in the top US News and World Report for top high schools based on advanced placement kinds of things. But we also knew that not a ton of innovation going on in our school district. And he wanted to change the conversation away from how many AP classes do you offer and how many kids are graduating as valedictorians and how many 4.0s do we have and all of these kind of things, to a different conversation about what it is we need to be doing for our kids and helping them move forward. So he allowed me to hire a colleague of mine, Sean Conelli, and Sean and I went out and we tried to have these conversations. And what we kept hearing time and time again, we would ask people, what do you need to know, do, and be like to be a successful adult and citizen today? And every time we asked the question, we would get this beautiful list from people. You have to be collaborative. You have to learn quickly from your failures. You have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to work in diverse groups of people, and you have to be open-minded. And, all of these things, beautiful things that we want people to have that skill set. And then Sean and I would say, wonderful. So what educational things are you advocating for and supporting in your effort to make sure that schools deliver on those very things? And that's where the disconnect happened. We heard things like tougher standards, longer school days, longer school years, fire bad teachers, get rid of unions, strengthen unions, quit paying superintendents so much. There's this litany of non-solutions, really, things that were going to have absolutely zero influence on the things that they say they really wanted. And so we're sitting around one day like, how do we help them understand that what they want and what they're advocating for are in direct opposition with one another? And Sean and I were talking about, well, all of our histories are fiction. We only remember certain pieces of history, and then we kind of patch the rest of it together. Kind of that old adage that old athletes often tease each other, the older I get, the better I was, kind of idea, right? And so Sean said, well, we need to have the Billy Madison Project. Right? The reference being, of course, the old Adam Sandler movie, where his character has to go back to school to prove he knows stuff. We said, well, let's put leading adults in our community back in school for a day as high school kids. with schedules and not visitors, but actual students for a day. Then let's talk to them. And then let's see if we can't help them see the disconnect between those two things. So we identified 60 people in our community. We chose very carefully. We wanted, our criteria was if we put the names and the faces in the local newspaper, that everyone in our community would be able to look at least at one of those people and say, that person's like me. They look like me, they live where I live, they have a job like I have, they're about my age, whatever it might be, that they would be able to identify with them. And then in small groups, we sent them back to school. We had great participation. I think we made 61 invitations to get our 60 participants. 7 area high schools agreed to have adults go back and be these students. And what we found when we met with them in small groups after their experience is they still generated that beautiful list. We want to know, do and be like, be a successful adult. And then we said, how are the high schools doing? Your day as a student, how many of the things on that list did you actually get to do and engage with and learn? And they're like, almost none of them. If there was something communication related, there was a bit of that, but literally none of the rest of the things high schools are doing with kids. And they said that was very frightening to see. They thought schools had changed a lot. And so there's lots of comments about schools exactly the same as it was when I went to school, except instead of chalkboards, they're whiteboards. Instead of overhead projectors, they're computers projectors, right? And so what emerged, 3 key themes that kept coming back. The adults who went back as students said, kids are bored. One person said, I was scared in that high school, and we thought it was a physical fear. And he said, no, I was scared because it was like being in a zombie movie. There wasn't a bright eye in the place. Kids were just walking the halls, just trudging along from one thing to the next. He goes, that was terrifying to me. That's not the kind of culture and place that we want for our kids. So the kids are bored, teachers are working their tails off, trying to make connections with the kids and keep the kids engaged. And the biggest one of the 3 for us, because we weren't sure people would see this, they're like, it never dawned on us that we separate out all the subjects and disciplines into these isolated classes, Algebra 2 and government class and biology. And that's the dumbest thing we do, but I just thought that's how school worked. Like, well, talk more. Like, well, it decontextualizes all the learning. Right? If I just learn Algebra 2 in isolation from anything real, of course it's boring. Of course it's hard to learn. And of course it's hard to teach. Like, where is context in this whole arena? It just seems like the kids are being thrown information and they're miraculously supposed to connect it together. So those were their 3 kind of realizations. And then Sean and I just said, well, design the school that would solve that problem, that would create the things that you want and wouldn't create bored kids and overworked teachers and the like, and decontextualize content. And they came up with 3 themes again and again and again. Project, passion, project, community. He said, show me a passionate adult. I will show you a successful adult, a resilient adult, an adult who knows how to build a network and communicate with people and find answers and fight through struggles, all of those kind of things, because they care deeply about what they're doing. Kids care deeply about things, right? So find what they care about, utilize that as a lever for learning, right? Take their passions and use that as a tool. The second was, this one hurt a little bit as an educator, but I had to admit that they were correct. Somebody said in one of the meetings, has anybody ever acknowledged that the fact that most of the work the kids do in school is fake? I'm like, what? Like, it's fake work. It's work created by one person for one person that ends in a point or a grade or a score, and then the kid circular files it. Why do you think any kid would give their best effort for something that's fake? and meant for only one person. We're like, wow, yeah, you're right. Most of the work in school is made up. And they're like, look at our community. We're struggling to recover from a flood. We have so many opportunities and so many problems to solve in our community. Why aren't we engaging kids in the real work of what it means to be an adult and a citizen in our community and let them help us? And then the third was the community aspect. Get them out doing the real work with the community so that the teachers aren't the sole providers of an education, right? So that's what Iowa Big became, a Project Passion Community. And you know the foundations now of what we do. We go out and we find projects from business, nonprofit, and government agencies in town. And we put a project around it and invite the kids to participate if that's something they care about. And so we have kids doing in-depth biological research on brownfields. We have students running huge data sets for a company in town called LimoLink. We have kids building and creating community gardens and urban orchards and coming up with ways to make new things happen in our community all over the place. So we're just unleashing their potential and just really treating them as if they're human beings and not just students that we're trying to run through a system. So that's the Iowa Big model in a nutshell. We founded it on 5 elements that are called learner-centered elements. And this is one of the resources I will share with you in a bit. But the learner-centered paradigm. So the learner-centered paradigm says that the learner is at the center of everything. They're the focal point. It's not curriculum, it's not content, it's not teachers, it's students, they are at the center of the learner. This includes the adults as learners, by the way. And so these 5 elements are elements that we take very seriously at Big, and they're a complementary set. You can't just decide to do one and ignore the others. You have to work on these simultaneously in your design. The first, of course, is learner agency. Giving kids choice and voice in what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, when they want to learn it, especially at the high school where 9 to 24 months, they're full-fledged adults. So they should be owning their learning and not be handing over responsibility for learning to other people like teachers and tests and things like that. So it's all about ownership, responsibility, understanding yourself as a human being and as human beings learn. And so that's what we do with that. Personalized, relevant, and contextualized is a set. They all go together. I see lots of schools who have personalized learning. Lots of schools who talk about relevance in their curriculum. Very few schools I hear talk about context. But experiences have to be personalized. They have to be relevant in the moment. Kids, you remember as a high school kid, you probably asked the question, right? When am I going to need this? And you would watch your teacher hem and haw, because a lot of times they couldn't answer it, right? And like, well, you'll need this someday. Okay, wonderful. That's engaging, right? I want to know how what I'm learning helps me today in the moment. And then contextualize, I'll talk a bit more about. Education in the last 100 years has been so focused on content acquisition and filling the kids with stuff. I think there's a fear that if we don't fill them with all the stuff, they're going to miss something important and it's going to ruin their life outcomes or something. And we forget about context. Content is worthless without context, right? Context brings to life the things I need to know, the skills I need to have to be able to perform in that situation. A simple example of that would be, I was a basketball player in my younger days, and in the gym at practice, I could make 8, 9 out of 10 free throws, right? In the first quarter or second quarter of a game, I could shoot 70%-ish free throws. But when the game got tight, my percentage as a free throw shooter went down, right? Down to closer, sadly to say, like 60%. Well, why is that? Clearly, I have the mechanics to make 9 out of 10. Why am I only making 6 out of 10? Context. The crowd, the gym's full of people. There's something that counts about winning or losing the game. The clock is up there ticking. I can see the score. All of those contextual factors affect my mental state and my ability to stay calm and my ability to remember my mechanics, right? And so the content is not the critical piece in that. I have the content knowledge of shooting the free throw. I have to learn how to have contextual knowledge and learn how to perform better and better in those contextual situations. So personalized, relevant, and contextualized is something that we're always striving for in all of our projects. Competency-based, simple one, moving away from points and grades and standards and grade points to are you competent? If I put you in a situation, can you competently perform? Can you learn what you need to learn? Can you pivot and move? Can you collaborate in the ways that you need to be competent in the moment? The last two, socially embedded and open walled. Learning is inherently a social activity. It's not a lone wolf activity. We learn better and more effectively and more deeply when we're in community with each other, when we're communicating and sharing ideas and learning together. And so that is a critical component. And open walled is get them out in the community, get them out of that school and into the community where they can see how all of us function and probably dysfunction at times, and how we try to figure stuff out, right? So that's the learner-centered paradigm that we use heavily, make sure that our model is performing in that way. So key to a transformed school, for me, those contextualized experiences are critical. Put the kids in context that make them perform. We are very focused on intrinsic motivation. How do we rebuild a kid's intrinsic motivation? Sadly, K-12 education drives intrinsic motivation out and replaces it with extrinsic motivation. That's a bad recipe for adulthood and for life. And so one simple marker that we use, we get kids that come to us from traditional experiences, and they see the work of projects and the work of Iowa Big, and they ask things like, am I done yet? Is this good enough? That's an indication that they're extrinsically motivated, right? Somebody else is going to tell me this is good enough so I can quit doing it, or that I can do just enough to make it okay. We want our students exiting Iowa Big, not asking that question anymore, and instead asking, what's next? Where am I going next? What am I going to learn next? What am I going to do next? Which is a much more intrinsically motivated or design kind of thing. And then finally, we as a staff every year constantly challenge the assumptions that we have both about our school and about education in general. And we have come to learn that there are some debilitating assumptions in traditional education that's preventing them from taking steps forward and making things like this happen. A couple of quick examples. That 180 days is the magic formula for learning something, right? Or learning a subject area. That the best way to learn is separate all the disciplines out and learn all the content first, and then hopefully you can apply it. And the biggest one that we get the most pushback on, because they think we're soft on, not tough, is that the assumption that we as adults have any real idea what any individual teenager needs to know to be successful in their future. Now, I say that with the caveat of beyond, obviously, foundational skill sets, right? Foundations in mathematical thinking and language usage, writing, communicating, right? All of those things, of course, we know people need those. But when it comes to specific skill sets, I don't know if the kid sitting in front of me needs to know chemistry at the college level. I don't know if they need to know algebra 2, right? We make these huge assumptions that we're going to give kids all of this stuff in the hopes that maybe they will use it someday. The results of that are bored kids and kids who can't retain critical information because it doesn't matter to them. We only really learn and it sticks to us when it matters to us. And so we are much more interested in helping kids use their foundational skill sets and hone them in projects, but to pursue academic areas that they really care about. A quick example, we have a young lady who's now serving as a page at the Iowa House, loves politics, loves political science, knows that she wants to be in politics in some way, shape, or form. At Big, that's what she does. She gets involved with projects that help her understand more about politics. She gets to use the time to be a part of a political movement and help a candidate and get herself set up to be a page. We don't waste her time with Algebra 2. We don't waste her time with college level chemistry. Right? So we're asking different questions now. So is chemistry important to know for people? Absolutely. Right? But what chemistry is it? Is it the chemistry of food? Is it the chemistry to understand what we're doing to our environment when we want super lush green lawns, right? That strikes us as the chemistry that might be more relevant to the student who we know and they know is not going to be a chemist, not going to work into that. That's the toughest part of our job, honestly, is having that argument with people and helping our kids and others understand that, yes, well-rounded, knowing lots of things is important. How do you become your own best advocate for what you want to learn and where you want to go? So how do we make it all happen? We think at Big that the required change is a paradigmatic one, not technical or adaptive change. Most people think of change as that. There's some technical things I tweak. A lot of people go, oh, so you're a project-based school. We just do projects and we'll be Big. Well, Big isn't a project-based school. Big is a learner-centered school who happens to use projects to get to where we want to go with kids. Quick example of paradigm. A lot of people are like, what the hell's a paradigm, right? Why should I care? A quick example of a paradigm that's kind of distant for all of us, so it's easier to understand. For centuries, the idea of bloodletting in the medical field was a big idea. This notion that when someone was sick, if you took the right amount of blood out of the right part of the body, you would heal the body, right? Well, in our world today, we see on its face the ridiculousness of that idea. Right? And in fact, in a lot of cases, you kill people because you're taking blood out of them. It wasn't until Lister and others found these microscopic things called, viruses and bacteria, and that actually made people sick. Well, you can imagine if all of us were doctors trained in bloodletting, and somebody came to us and said, you're doing it all wrong. Don't take blood out of this person. They have a virus or they have a bacteria. We need to treat them in a different way. How ridiculous you would sound, right? That's a paradigm shift. And those paradigm shifts for the medical field, it took almost an entire generation of doctors to move away from bloodletting towards the viral and bacterial kind of science that we have now. That's exactly where we're at, I think, in education. A lot of times I will speak about these things and people look at me like I'm a crazy person because their paradigm is a school-centered paradigm, the more traditional. And so I think the change is paradigmatic. You have to have people in your community who see this paradigm of learner-centered and can embrace it and work with it and try to move it forward. So that's the biggest challenge, I think. Probably Autumn and Al and Maureen have similar stories of when you try to talk to people about how you see education, your paradigm is so different than the others, not good or bad, just different. It's really hard to communicate and get them to move forward. So let me shut this off here. So that's concludes my initial comments here, Fred. I'd just love to now to spend some time, with some Q&A, and I know we have some other experts in the room who can share what this model looks like from their perspectives.
In a bit, instead of going out into breakout rooms, how about if we just have one big breakout room, and I will post your potential dialogue questions in the chat in a few minutes. How about we have questions? What questions might you have for Trace based on what he's presented? What alternatives might you suggest?
Brad, this is Drew. Trace, can you give some more examples of some of the projects students have been involved in at the community-based level?
Yeah, and Leslie, I might put you on the spot. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about grants experience. But yeah, for example, this fall, we have two types of projects we call inbound and outbound. An inbound project is one in which we go out into our community and find a project for a kid. And outbound is where kids say, this is a problem I see in our community and I want to be a part of solving it. And so they actually pitch a project to our community. A quick example, we had a derecho here this fall, 150-mile-an-hour winds, 65% of our tree canopy's gone, trees everywhere all over our town. This is terrible. Our cities, we're devastated by this. People are down and out. These trees are ugly all over. How do we turn this into something beautiful? And so they came up with an idea of, let's take some of these down trees and get chainsaw artists to make beautiful art out of these trees. And then let's auction that art off to trees so that Trees Forever can have funds to reforest our community. They got the city of Marion involved, got the mayor excited. They had to go through a 15-page form to get permission to have these chainsaw artists in the city square for a week. They had to go find the artist. They had to negotiate with the artist the percentages of how much they would get for the auction art versus Trees Forever. They had to do all the marketing. They had to do all the legal work, make sure it was okay that we were sanctioning the use of chainsaws in a school project for a week, right? All of those things they had to deal with. The result was, for an entire week, chainsaw artists spent their days making beautiful chainsaw art. People from all over the community came to Marion Square Park, bringing their lawn chairs and sitting there for hours on end watching these artists work. At the end of the week, they auctioned off the pieces and raised $25,000. Right? So it's those kind of things that kids are doing. We have kids that are working with our city right now, attacking the problem of gun violence in our city. And what's that mean, and how can the student voice be an important part of the solutions to that? We have a group of kids who are working with our local school districts on equity and getting the voice of those who haven't traditionally had the voice, so that everyone better understands what equity really means and what we can do to ensure that we're equitable. Kids have designed walking bridges across our river with architectural firms. Right? It just runs the gamut in a lot of ways that way. I don't know, maybe this time, Leslie, is a good time, but what's it like being a parent of a big student, and what did Grant get or not get out of his experience?
If I can take the liberty, I'll talk about three aspects, because I also saw Susan's question. First of all, how you get parents involved. Got to be honest, some of it is watching your own child. So freshman year for my son, February, part of it was the crash that happens to swimmers in February when they get out of the pool. But part of it was he literally was laying on his bed sobbing, saying, is this it? Do I just have to survive the next 3.5 years? And I couldn't accept that as a parent. And he was my second child to have that experience. my daughter in middle school was bored and struggling to feel engaged. And I had a teacher say to me, well, you know, in middle school, there's not much we can do for her, but maybe high school will be better. So, and knowing Trace and having some proximity to the evolution of big school ideas, I knew it was out there. So some of it is just introducing it to parents. Quite honestly, they're going to jump in, the kids are going to jump in, and there is sort of an orientation that has to happen. Trace referenced that, where for a while the kids are sort of shocked and maybe even paralyzed by, really? Like, I get to choose stuff? Grant, 3 projects that give an example of Grant's experience. Hydroponics lab. So how do you build a hydroponics project that can supply microgreens to local restaurants, but also go through the whole cycle of what does it take to build the table? What does it take to build a monitoring system? How do you deal with somebody breaks into the container it's in? Just all that real world stuff. He pitched a skate park project, and you know, I think it was the beginning of his junior year. He had just gotten into big. He went and met with local community leaders, the mayor, city council members, to try and pitch that they include a skate park in a development project. It's sort of like Suzuki, you know, where you teach kids early to just stand up and play their violin. You'd be surprised what our kids will do and tackle if we give them the opportunity. He was also part of a video project that captured a family's journey to creating a land trust for about 80 acres in Johnson County, where they used a drone to film. Again, first year in big. Grant at the end had the opportunity to be referred to as the Swiss Army knife of the team. So he was the guy that, and Trace knows if this is really true or if they were just being nice to him, but you know, he would do whatever people wanted because he wasn't an expert in editing, but he got to try a whole bunch of skills, and it awakened in him an interest in conservation in the land. And now he's an environmental sciences major at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he just added an education minor because he wants to create opportunities for more young people to learn in this way. You know, and so he ended up managing a pretty complex schedule, doing all the things that he would need to do to be successful in a post-secondary environment. And he had to learn how to ask questions. And the third piece, if it becomes relevant to the conversation later, that I would throw out there is I also have experience being someone who pitched projects to the kids and who hosted projects where we had the kids weigh in and do work with us. And it's awesome. So I can talk about that later, but thanks, Trace. It saved my son's school career. And unlike his older sister, who I had to literally drag, like think of throwing your kid in a red wagon and dragging them to the finish line. Grant had energy. He developed less patience for his everyday high school experience, but he enjoyed it.
Your question's an important one. Bringing parents to the model, that's that's a nut we haven't completely cracked, honestly. What we find is that parents like Leslie, who've had certain life experiences, and they recognize, hey, this is a valid way. Come to this model quickly. The parents who struggle the most with allowing their kids to make this step are the ones who, and I get the feeling, I got a 26 and a 23-year-old, I had to fight these same emotions, this kind of living vicariously, and your kid needs to be seen as an A kid and a great student, right? Because there's some kind of weird psyche about, you know, how parents feel about their kids when that happens. And just we're trying to figure out how to help parents reduce the fear of, gosh, if my kid misses this AP class, they're not going to get into this college. And so we try to explain to parents, look, there are, 3,000 kids in Cedar Rapids with great GPAs, 3.8 to 4.4, and their schedules are full of AP, and they got all kinds of advanced placement credits. Well, you take that times 3,000 across the country, right? And so your kids trying to get into this college, they look just like the other 10,000 kids trying to get in or get that scholarship. Give them experiences where they have a story to tell, where they can provide context to the things that they know. And they can tell you about the Rachel project and how they raised 25,000 and all the things they learned about city government and managing a large project and dealing with diverse people. We've had students compete and win significant scholarships and getting into places like Dartmouth and Brown on the strength of their big experience, because they stood out and above all of those other kids who had the same set of credentials. So that's the message we try to send to that particular demographic of parents. The other message that we send to students is, if school isn't your thing, if you're bored at school, you're not doing well, you're not engaged, you don't feel like you belong, MIG is a great opportunity for you to come and find yourself. And it's a smaller environment. It's a place where you're plenty smart. You just might not be able to show it in the ways that you want to in a traditional setting. So come to MIG. So we have every year we have kids on the other side of that spectrum who are nearing dropout, or they got 1.5 GPAs. And I always challenge visitors when they come, if they spend any more than a couple hours with us, I said, you tell me which kid's the 4.0 kid and what kid's the 1.5 kid, and you won't be able to do it. You can't do it because they can't distinguish. The 1.5 kid often is outperforming the 4.0 kid for one simple reason. 4.0 kid has been taught that mistakes are fatal. Failure is a horrible thing, and you can't miss anything. You got to know everything and do it perfectly out of the gate. Well, we know in real life that's just a fantasy. Well, the 1.5 kid, they're used to things not working out, and so failure for them is not scary at all. In real life context, the skill set almost reverses, right? Those kids who are C and D students often outshine because they're less afraid. They haven't bought into the old extrinsic motivating system as much. It's a fascinating dilemma to how do you communicate to these very diverse groups of parents and hit on the thing that they're most concerned about.
And I would just add too, my husband was one of those. I don't think Trace was there for this conversation, but my husband was a significant skeptic. And so, and he had been working with big school kids as well with his nonprofit, concerned about the mechanics of what would be considered for college entrance. But I'll tell you, my son is a poster child. He competed with hundreds of applicants at Carthage, some scholarship opportunities, and as a result, received a 75% scholarship. Not based on need, based on his ability to present ideas and talk to faculty, and really, really different outcome for him than I would have predicted if he had stayed in a traditional school model.
Leslie, you just brought up something I'd like to ask any of you really, but Trace, I'm fascinated with this and very much support the need for it. It's not too hard to extend what you're doing into the collegiate and higher education world. It sounds like a lot of your preparations were trying to help kids get better prepared to enter college. I've raised three very they're three adults now who are thriving. Two of the three, all of them got college educations, but two of the three said, I absolutely did not need to have a college education to do what I'm doing. And by the way, they're doing very, very well in their fields of choice. So I'm sitting here thinking about the extension of your concepts into the pre-professional, or let's just face it, we're all trying to produce people that can have a contribution to our society, right? So huge questions are in my mind right now, but I guess I have to bring it back down to some place where we can land and maybe have a conversation about how you measure progress. As an employer, when we teach a concept, we make sure everybody understands the concept, right? Otherwise, why do it? Another pet peeve of mine is that I was victim to and have seen it all the way through my almost 63 years. Teachers who deliver tests and take pleasure that some of the kids didn't pass. It's like all you're doing is proving that you didn't teach the concepts when kids get bad grades. I hate that. I mean, it's been a pet peeve of mine. I'm talking too much, and I really want to just ask a question about how you measure learning. I mean, you can only improve things if you can measure them, right? That's the general question. I'm very much in support of what you're doing.
Yeah, Phil, thanks. It's an important question and a difficult one. Our challenge at Big has been that all the traditional measures that people look for in schools are not things that we're all that interested in. And so when you try to assess our kids on traditional measures, it's really challenging. Like, we'll often have teachers who are skeptical go, well, okay, they took government at Big and learned a lot through projects, but I bet they can't pass my test. Well, how many of your kids can pass that test a year from now? Well, research would show only about 30% retention, right? So you've wasted 70% of that kid's time teaching them stuff they aren't going to remember, right? And so we talk a lot about opportunity costs. What's the opportunity cost of forcing a kid to learn content they have absolutely no interest in? That makes our measurement systems really difficult. So our measure, we had in-service day on Monday, and we spent our whole day on assessment. And I round out our assessment. So we have heavy emphasis on self-assessment, right? So here's our standards, here's the values that we have, here's the skill set that are important, that our community tells us are important, and lots of opportunities to self-reflect. Where are you at? What do you need to do next? Then there's a professional assessment part of that. Here's what we see you doing. Here's how we see you performing in these contexts and where we think you should improve. So we have the quadrant and then the project side. See projects as a 4-letter word. Those projects in traditional school tend to be, I'm going to be on a project team. I want Autumn on my team because I know she'll do the work and it'll be great. And I'll get her grade by doing very little. And so a lot of our assessment is around and the roles they need to play, the responsibility they need to take. A lot of people, that seems really soft, but those are the kind of measures that we see more employers care more about that. I mean, almost every employer I talked to said, I can teach them the stuff they need to do. With this interpersonal skill set and the ability to solve problems themselves, I'm not interested. And so those are really, as you know, Phil, really hard things to measure. On the traditional measurement side, the The area that we really focus on tends to be ACT. All in our community take the ACT. Kids consistently outperform, honestly, kids from traditional schools. We've had many examples of this, but one quick example. We had a young lady who was with us for 3 years of her high school career. The last 3 years of her high school career, she took English at Big. She never opened the door of an English classroom in traditional. Her sophomore year, she took the test, the ACT, subset, got somewhere in the 20s, I don't know. Her senior year, she wanted to retake it, see if she could get better. She maxed out the English sub-score, right? So we tend to point towards measures there. If you're worried about the academic side, we certainly have some evidence there. I know Al and Drew can probably talk a lot more about the college side of things. You know, what that's looking like. We have lots of kids who are going into trades, and lots of kids who are asking that very question, Phil. Do I really need college to do the things I want to do? I have a daughter the same, political science degree. She's a chief of staff for a trucking company. Right? So, Dad, college was nice and everything, but I could have learned all this by just starting to work for this trucking company. Those are challenges. I know Al at the community college level, they were having serious conversations about the implications of micro-credentialing and experience over a transcript kind of thing.
I have a quick story to tell, and then I promise you that I'll go back on mute for the rest of the session. But about 20 years ago now, there was Dr. Les Omatani, who was the superintendent of West Des Moines schools. I don't know if any of you overlapped with Les, but I believe that Les had a great vision for education as well. He was working with Peter Senge, the fifth discipline group. He organized 100-person 1-week community leadership development opportunity, I'll call it. And it was a fantastic week, all kinds of systems learning, implementation, all that. We did a check-in every morning. And I'm telling this story only to, I think, affirm what you're doing. And it's kind of a fun story, but also quite depressing. Every morning we'd check in, and I was with a small group that included she ended up being the valedictorian of the class in her year of graduation. I think she lettered in 3 sports. She was in a fine arts organization as well. Had a full-time job outside of school. And probably as close to a straight A student as you can get. And one morning she broke down and she said, I just need to tell you that I am so busy trying to get good grades in school that I don't think I'm learning anything. And it was, that was a moment for us to sort of rally around the concepts actually that you're implementing. And I think she went on to be a very successful person, but her observation that morning stuck with me forever.
And we get a lot of students who like to say those kind of things. And I know there's no correlation between a 4.0 grade point and a successful life outcome, right? So we just have to help the community understand that these are not necessarily the effective measures they maybe once were.
Grace, you had some great potential breakout group questions. What I think I'd like to do, if it's okay, is put these in the chat, and then we'll just have one big great breakout group and interact with those. How would that be? So I just sent those in. I thought these were such great questions that Trace formulated. Thought I'd put them out there. What struck you as you heard the Iowa Big Story and model? What are the implications of high school education in the face of accelerating change? What are the biggest hurdles to bringing this educational innovation to your community? I particularly like this one. How does such a model threaten traditional school models and beliefs? And why? And what are the potential reactions from the establishment in education?
Trace, this is Scott. A question that relates a little bit to a few of the bulleted questions questions that Fred just read. And it goes back to something that you mentioned. You mentioned that, you know, in traditional projects in school, you know, you want to get on the kids team that you know is going to get the best score. Obviously, with Big still being a project focus, how is that different? I mean, is there still initially that drive to get on the kids team that you think is going to be successful, or is it a different outlook? And if so, kind of how and why?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's definitely a process because obviously, you know, the majority of the kids are coming from very traditional. My hope is that the students that Autumn works with every day at the middle school, we start seeing more and more of them, and they've already figured this out. But a lot of work goes into helping kids understand what a healthy team looks like and what it means to be on a project. Because we do get those behaviors, right? The vast majority of kids get excited that they get to pick a project they care about rather than be assigned one. So the fact that I'm actively choosing to be a part of a project I say I care about goes a long way. And if the kid doesn't do anything in the project, we start having conversations with, why are you on this project? We thought you cared about it. Well, you know, Al and I are best friends, and Al was excited about it, so I just wanted to be on Al's team, right? So we help coach them to like, this probably isn't in your best interest, right? So that's one. And then when they get in project teams, all of our teachers have been trained in Agile and the Agile mindset. So we are using those tools, Kanban boards, and make work visible, you know, the assigning of tasks and things so that it becomes very obvious what kids are responsible for what. And then our job as teachers, we just constantly coach and mentor kids who tend to, it takes some kids, it takes a long time for them to break the idea that I'm just going to do the bare minimum just to keep them off my back so I can pass, to that what's next, beginning to see that, wow, I can make things happen much bigger than myself by applying myself. And so for us, that's as big of the learning for us as any of the standards in a class that they're taking, is that skill set.
I also think it's interesting how embedded it is in our ideas about school that essentially, if we dig down far enough, we believe that kids wouldn't choose to learn unless we make them do it. Versus humans are wired. I mean, I personally believe we're happiest when we're curious and learning and exploring. You look back at some of Sir Ken Robinson's work, you know, sort of that joy of childhood, which we then go on to sort of diss as we grow up. You know, we're not supposed to have those feelings. And I would tell you that just watching my son and the kids I've worked with over time, if we can ignite curiosity, if we can give kids the opportunity to reconnect with that energy, they will choose it. It is more life-giving. You know, and you look at things like the book Drive, what makes us resilient and creative and contribute? It's mastery and agency and all those things that Trace has already talked about. We just, you know, trust a little bit, but that's tough to give up. And a lot of times we don't even talk about that. We don't even touch that topic.
Leslie, you're bringing up a good point about an underlying assumption about, you know, students have to be forced to learn. And I'm curious too, to answer like one of the questions, and I've got sort of a two-part question. Trace, your comment about when you interviewed, I think you said 60 different parents and the comments you heard. We recently did something similar at Wells Fargo, and our group, there's about 25 of us, and they asked about, you know, what makes you feel engaged at work, and some of the same things you said, you know, collaboration, impact to our customers and shareholders, and that's really what drives us. And it's interesting because you don't always feel like you get that in school. My question is, when because learning seems to be so individualized, like you need to make sure that everyone has developed that competency in this, but in certain things. But now you're in a team, team environment, and you kind of touched on it because you're like, well, they use Kanbans to help make sure that everyone's sort of carrying their own weight. Can you talk a little bit more about how you ensure that as things get assigned, that that everyone's sort of developing, taking on that experiential learning, that's making sure that they acquire those skills. And then the second part, sort of unrelated, are there certain fields or types of higher learning that aren't conducive to this? So, you hear a lot like, well, I don't need to go to college for this, but if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, yes. So can you talk a little bit about some of the maybe types of professions that maybe it's a little more challenging to transition into higher education?
Yeah, wonderful
Sorry
question.
for the questions.
Wonderful question. So one of the things so kids who come to Big, they sign up for Big through their traditional high school. So they take 3 periods a day with us, and they take traditional sounding courses. So I might take 11th grade English, I might take sociology, I might take, introduction to business. And so we're responsible for the students to know and understand the standards for those courses. So that helps to drive a lot of the task work in the project, trying to help the kids, make them aware that, hey, you're here for English. There's a research component. Our partner is asking for some research and a white paper to be written on this topic. This is something you might want to think about picking up and taking on. So we do that. And not all the standards can be learned in a real life project. That's a conversation for a whole different day. But we also then have what we call seminar. And so once a week, the government teacher, for example, has government seminar. And the kids who take government come in, and Dennis, Becky, they're very good about, look, these standards about the 3 branches of government and some of these other standards are not going to be things that naturally occur in your project. So we are going to engage in those kind of things. Just like everywhere else, we always try to personalize those seminars, force kids to say, okay, I'm a lit teacher, we are going to read this book. No, the English teacher comes in and says, here's the literature standard. How do you want to help show that you know this stuff? What kind of things are you interested in? And so traditional learning at Big looks a lot more like what we do as adults, book clubs and small group conversations, that kind of thing. Your next question is a really important one that we've addressed as well. What about the kids that want to go and be doctors? They know they want to be an attorney. Our advice when a student comes and I want to be a part of Big and I know I'm going to be a doctor, is like, you take your AP chemistry and your bio at school, right? You're going to need that content. You need to be exposed to it. It's stuff that in your profession, all that stuff you've got to know. So how do we take your Big experience and help to round that out, right? So that might be the part of how do you build an interpersonal skill set so that you're a doctor your patients love, right? Or put you in can we give you an in-depth experiment related to chemistry or biology that your biology teacher back at school just can't do because of time constraints, that we could then enhance your understanding of this, this chemistry, this biology. So that's how we approach it. We don't try to pretend that, don't take any of your chemistry back at school. Like, no, you're gonna be a doctor, doggone it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a really good idea for you, right?
Great. Thank you.
I'm going to break a promise and ask another question. You're making me want to think, and I'm asking everyone, is anyone working, is there any institution, is there an effort at all in our country to reevaluate standardized testing? You mentioned the ACT. I'm one that believes that doesn't really test who's going to be successful. But is there anyone looking at that? It's just a general naive question.
Al, I'd ask you to weigh in. I know you spent a lot of years at the college level. You'd have better insight into that probably than I would.
Yeah, and as Trace is aware, I think it was in the 1980s, survey was done from a local school district asking all the colleges and universities, what if we didn't have GPAs, and what about all that? And literally every college and university said, we can work around it. We don't need those scores or numbers, okay? But why do they persist? Because they have been born out of convenience and tradition. And but what we are seeing right now is we're seeing the general population using alternative means to show that they're prepared for college. And so, and also just due to COVID and the like, and the inability to run mass testing centers and the like, a huge natural drop in the number of people taking those tests, along with institutions just saying, we're going to take a hiatus from those tests for a while. And so I think we're at a shifting point right now where that will be of less importance. Generally speaking, people start out and say a GPA is probably a more accurate predictor than a single session test number. So that's kind of where we are there. One comment, just in general, and I'll tie it across some of the sessions that have been offered. I think in general, we're underestimating the collective capacity of all of us in regard to making big social changes, including education. And because we think about people, every single individual, we tend to think about them in a narrow, deterministic, reductionist, linear way. And this causes great splits. Every grading system is set up to separate the chaff, sort out the good ones from the bad, and then people ask questions about measurement. Well, when we got to get past that, because the notion is we have literally everybody living in bubbles, afraid to talk with one another on any substantive issue related to social change. And so what is happening here, whether it's race, the economy, elections, where you go to school and the like, we're really stuck. I was going to suggest, Fred, that, and this will be maybe I've never done this before, so put on your seatbelt, but if we were to check in like we did at the beginning of today's session, and Fred says, like everybody to introduce themselves, but when you register, please put down your high school and college grade point and what you majored in, okay? And by the way, put that on everybody's name badge in your organization when they come in and want to collaborate on a project, okay? Now, what is going to be the stream of consciousness that exists within each one of those individuals in terms of separation, artificial relationships, and the like? And I think what we're really talking about is we need to realize that we are connected in something larger than school buildings and classrooms and separate courses. We're connected in communities that are untapped. Right now, we're looking at a massive change in education that's going to basically create an opportunity for students to be doing these kinds of things that will make them more developmentally ready for the kind of complex problems. You know, if I said, hey, let's get after climate change, frankly, that polarizes, but it opens other people's eyes. We have urgency to get out of this narrow, deterministic way. And I think that thread, that's where I see Iowa Big stepping forth and helping create kind of like, I can make a difference kinds of world, because when you study human behavior, students at that level, and by nature, they have a natural altruism. They thrive when they are contributing. And that's the hidden element here that we as adults and community members can cultivate. So I'll stop there. But please, Fred, save the grade points and the majors and all that on our screen so that when Phil talks or I talk, you can see what my high school GPA was and the like. It might not be as appealing as I would like, and that might hurt my ego.
Alan, in real life application, the guy that started our firm, who's in his late 80s now, had many gifts, but grade point was not one of them. And he always used to laugh. He said, in our profession, and I think he was actually being serious, he said, in our profession, you'll notice that straight A students go back to school and teach, and B students work for C students.
Exactly.
And by the way, we at RDG, and many of you don't know us, but we're 180 folks now, started in Iowa and practicing all over the country with architects, landscape architects, lots of people that have degrees, you know, interior designers, lighting, civil engineers, all that. We never look at grade points, ever. We look at what people can do, and we've adopted, in our firm, we've adopted strength finders as a way to build teams and to get people in the, to use Jim Collins' lingo, you know, to get them in the right seats on the right bus. It's been very effective, and it all has to do with emotional quotient and motivation. And yes, some technical skill, but people naturally flow to the places where they are able to thrive based on their skill attributes. And that's what we use, not grades.
Well, as a product of the Cedar Rapids schools, Phil, I think you just had a great commercial for all the great work that they've been doing for years. They need to take it in this direction.
Yeah, I did graduate from Kennedy a long time ago.
Yeah, these kind of stories really resonate. You know, my youngest daughter's just started her career in electrical engineering, and she was what I called my great addicted credit chaser. She never quite bought into dad's crazy talk about big, and you know, she bought in fully to get good grades and learn a bunch of stuff. Now as a 23-year-old, she goes to Alliant Energy and she realizes she knows nothing. She can do all the math and she can talk all the theory, but when you're staring at this 1,000 horsepower machine that's 3-phase and she's got to figure it out, right? She's like, why didn't they teach me this stuff, Dad? Why did I spend all my time learning all this content that actually the Excel spreadsheet does the math for me? I got to know what to put in the spreadsheet, right? And so that's kind of the thing that we're pushing against is, you know, if she's going to go be a research engineer, she probably needs to know all that stuff. But if she's a distribution engineer, all that the people in Cedar Rapids care about is that she knows enough to get their power back on fast, right? But she was never taught that part of it, and so she's got to learn. And so I've always asked the question, why do companies tolerate that? So you basically are hiring my daughter at a pretty good salary, and you're not counting on her producing anything for you for 2 years. I mean, they right out say that it's going to be 2 years before she's really, you know, a productive engineer for us. I'm like, seriously, why are you not going back to the colleges and saying, here's what I'm not hiring people from your college unless you deliver on these kind of things. So it's way beyond obviously a K-12 challenge and problem. Autumn, I got a quick question before we wrap up. One of the last questions there was, how do models threaten traditional school? I know converting a traditional middle school to a more learner-centered one has been your mission for several years. What has been the things that have been the biggest challenge? And maybe quickly, what does it look like for a middle school kid? I know what it looks like.
I'm trying to watch the time. So I'm in here. I have this vest on. I am sweating because I'm all worked up about this topic. And so I'm in, and I'm just, Trace has been a major inspiration, and so has Al and some of this journey, and I'm trying to watch the time. But I'm sitting here thinking about learner agency, and the whole point at our middle school is that. And we're a little radical, and I'm sure we've ruffled feathers, but one of the comments I say to teachers, if we're not doing these things in a way that's student-centered, keeping learner agency in mind, then it's malpractice. And so honestly, when you build a school around kids, some of those issues about equity just kind of shake themselves out because schools built around the kid. We have 100+ English language learners. We are, 54% students of color. We are building school around them and supporting the teachers. So we're not a perfect system, but we do blended learning. So every student experiences blended learning all day and project-based learning. It's built around an essential question. I was gonna pull this quick when you said something, Trace. Right now we're doing a badging process on each of these concepts. And so students badge through projects with self-reflection, and the rigor is really high in that area. What's cool is every project has field work and a context expert from the community. So for example, we just got done with the zombie apocalypse project, which is what if zombies took over Cedar Rapids, how would we handle that? And can 8th graders save Cedar Rapids kind of thing? So we had, people from city management interacting. We had somebody from the water plant. And it's just this active problem solving, engaging in such diverse perspective in our building. So the badging concept, when Dr. Pickering was talking about that concept of intrinsic, and extrinsic motivation, we really want ownership in our building. And we're pretty hard on each other if we're not seeing it happen. So again, not perfect, but I think I'm sitting in a spot when I was like, what a great group to be a part of, because you guys kind of get it, right? So I have a lot to learn, but I think for me, when you talk about models of traditional, it's interesting because there are 5 other middle schools here and we collaborate, but we're outliers at our building. So it creates challenges. We also have won a national award, but our community doesn't talk about that. And it's probably because we're not the affluent white school, so we don't do it for the accolades. We do it because we love our kids. And when we hire somebody, we say, get on board and you better love them the way we do, or we don't want you here. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. Not perfect, but there's a lot of really cool things happening on behalf of kids. And we were inspired by BIG initially. So that's been pretty powerful.
Well, I hate to cut us off, but we also want to be sensitive to time. Trace, thank you so much for being part of our group today, and everybody for joining us. Again, looking forward to our February 17th group, Omar Shiraz, ComStats University in Islamabad. His topic is going to be assumptions and futures. And one line from his description really struck me. Making assumptions about the future is not a problem, but believing that they are facts can be. And so he will facilitate a rich conversation. And so watch for that invitation. Again, thank you everybody for being here. And I'll send you all a link to this presentation today. So thank you everyone.